I have not seen Peter. If he comes, we'll let him in, and I'll be
Yeah,
quiet. So I think
I'm
Alexander's got a big treat for us this week. So
Yeah, thank you, Michael, for coming to talk to us today. It's really good. So I'll hand over to you and we'll enjoy your talk.
Perfect. Thank you. So let me share my screen first, and then it goes into presenter mode. Okay. Okay, can you see that's the first slide? Okay, I should say the Antikythera mechanism.
yes, it's perfect.
Okay, so I picked this top. I've been interested in the Antikythera mechanism about 12, 13 years now. It's not something that's widely known about, but I thought it was quite topical for now, this time, because we're in this period of solar and lunar eclipses. We've just had the one of the annular across the US. We've the next one coming up in beginning of April next year. And then that'll be the end of a phase of solar eclipse across the US for many years, and you'll see why in a second. Also, it actually features as a topic in the latest edition, November 2023 of Sky and Telescope. On page 22, there's a multi-page article on it there for anyone who wants to look into it more. And of course, you know, it's a solar-related discussion, as you can see on the cover here, where they're discussing one of the latest solar observatories that's coming online. And some of you who may have gone to the Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny, of course, that you will know it as the Antikythera, as they pronounce it there, which is, you know, slightly off in the correct pronunciation. And of course, as Hollywood does best, they have taken this and brought it to a whole new level where they can time travel with the device. I never knew it was actually going to feature in the film until I actually attended, so it was quite a surprise, given it's, you know, not that widely well known. But in terms of what we're talking about, the Antikythera mechanism, it's on display in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. You will see here, can you see my cursor there, Alexander? You can see it on the left-hand side. So you will see here some pieces of the artifact itself, along with some copies of X-rays, a model of it, and then lots of the likes of vessels in the background. And as we go and look some more of these pieces, you can see this piece, it's a distinctive wheel-like shape to it. And then as we have, okay. And then as we look in another of the slides, as you look at this piece here, you can see these like scale engravings on an arc. So it appears to be some tool for measurement or for some sort of clockwork type mechanism. And you can just about as well see some faint engravings in here, which in this case are Greek. And then as we look at this last piece, there's many pieces, I think just 70 or 80, I think at this stage, a number that have been recovered within the museum in recent years, and other pieces have actually fallen apart. You will see some sort of parallel scales here, like as if there's multiple wheels or engravings or dials happening. Within the museum as well, you will see all of these other statues here. So you may be asking, what exactly is this? Well, there was a shipwreck off the island of it's a model of it as well, which I will come to later. So there was a shipwreck on the island here, point A there, just off the coast of a little island called Antikythera. This is, for those of you maybe outside of Europe, you have Greece, the boot of Italy over here, Turkey on the right-hand side, Crete down here, and it's in between Greece and Crete. Where my cursor is, that's the island of Kythera. And then the smaller one, adjacent, you know, just below it is Antikythera. And a lot of islands are named in that manner in Greece. And just off the coast of that, in 1900, a shipwreck was recovered. It was quite unusual circumstances in which it was found, where sponge divers were taking shelter from a storm, and they were waiting out the storm, and they decided to go down and dive into the water. And when the first diver came back up, he came back in a hurry and said there was lots of naked dead people on the sea floor. And then the captain went down, he went into the suit, they had one suit between them, and then realized that this was some sort of a shipwreck, and here were some statues lying on the sea floor. So they reported to the authorities. It's on, as I said, on display in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. I suppose it's kind of going into what is it, where is it from, who made it, and obviously it is solar and astronomy related as well. And as we go through this talk, you'll learn more and more on how they came to understand what exactly it is. So it's been studied for across a number of years now. First, you have the Greek historians who looked at it initially. So it was found in the year 1900. In the 1901, then the Greek authorities went back and started to recover it and realized that it was actually a major archaeological find. In fact, it was it's the largest underwater archaeological find in the Greeks' history. And when they found this, they actually set up a whole new division to try and find more shipwrecks, basically get those finds. They made some breakthroughs on it, but then you have the likes of World War I and World War II in particular, where the Nazis came into Athens and they had to put some of these pieces to hide it underneath the floorboards of the museum. And then until politically later on, things stabilized. And then an Englishman by the name of Derek de Sola Price started looking at it in the mid-20th century. Then later on, the 1990s, Michael Wright and Alan Bromley were looking at it. And then finally, in the last number of years, you've had the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project. So here we have Derek de Sola Price, who was first looking at this. He was looked at in the kind of the 50s to 70s. British science historian. He's was a professor of the history of science in Yale. He made some breakthrough discoveries on it. You can see an early model he has there. He realized it was some sort of mechanism in some way related to the sun, the moon, and solar and lunar eclipses. He had some correct, let's say, on some correct understandings of it, but there were some errors in it as well. Mainly because this was quite difficult to understand. It was a number of pieces. It's quite crusted over. It's been underwater, as it happens for over 2,000 years. So it's quite difficult. You can't just, start sanding it down and peel it back. It's extremely delicate. It's been compared to something as delicate as pastry, for example. Any slight break and it just falls apart into pieces. What he did was he started taking some x-rays of it, and he was able to see there's not just the cogs and wheels that are on the surface of the device, but actually what's underneath, and could see the many, many layers of cogs and wheels within this device. Just some of the examples. And what he was able to do actually as well was actually start counting teeth in this. So by, for example, on the side here, he'd have part of an arc, and then he could start counting teeth and then try and extrapolate that to try and understand what exactly was this gear doing. Initially, it was thought it might be some sort of astrolabe, like an early form, kind of say, planetarium device you might have, or some other sort of clockwork mechanism. But then as they studied the gears, they were sure that not only this was astronomy related, but also eclipse related. Then it went in, it was the likes of Michael Wright and Alan Bromley. Michael Wright was the curator of the Science Museum in London, and Alan Bromley was in the University of Sydney, but had connections with the Science Museum. The two of these guys started looking at it together. Issues arose in that, and like many things in science, you have a history here of there's competition, there's intrigue, and there's holding on to information, trying to make sure that they might be the one maybe perhaps making the breakthrough. And ultimately, the results weren't published for quite some time. Alan Bromley passed away, and eventually some of that information went back, that of the testing and the research that was carried out went back to Michael Wright, and he was later able to publish some work on it and make some models. But it perhaps didn't happen as quickly as it ideally should have. And then and that's an example here of an X-ray. So one of the clever things that Michael Wright had done was he realized that when you're looking at a multi-gear kind of device under an X-ray, it's very hard to tell one gear level from another. So he made almost like a basic version of a CAT scan machine, where he was able to make an X-ray device that he could bring into the museum, and was able to focus onto almost like each layer of the mechanism within itself, so that then try and determine what gear was on top of the other. It's similar to the technology that would be used in a CAT scan machine, basically computer aided kind of an X-ray, where you can take multi-layer X-rays of the body, for example. In this case, you're now with a solid object, extremely fragile, and it was not allowed to leave the museum. So they had to bring it in, whatever they made, into the museum. Quite clever technology, and to make this himself way back then was quite ingenious, and that helped to reveal a lot more detail of what is happening in the instrument. Then you have the likes of the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project that started about 2005, and it's still ongoing. One of the key people here is Professor Tony Freeth, who's a filmmaker and a mathematician and works at the University College London. And what he did was to try and bring together a team of experts in ancient Greek astronomy, photography, and X-ray equipment. He realized that this was something extremely complex beyond his abilities to try and decipher on his own. And so rather than trying to figure it out himself, he was able to pull together a team of people to try and make that happen. I mentioned earlier about for example, drawing on top of the gears and trying to figure out what these might be. And as they drew on top of some of these gears, they realized one of them had about 235 teeth. 235 is quite a unique number, very much associated with astronomy. It's an odd number, it's a prime number. And 235 teeth, it's related to, so you have the thing called the synodic month. So as you know, the moon goes around the earth and you have a new moon, and when you come to the next one, you have another new moon. So a synodic month is 29.5 days. And the Greeks realized in about the 5th century BC that over 19 years, you have 235 of these synodic months. And when you divide that out, it gives them quite a close approximation to the length of a year. 365 days, 365 and a quarter days versus 365 days, 6 hours, 18 minutes. So it was actually quite an early way of trying to determine how long a year was. And they were figuring this out in the 5th century BC. And then there was another gear in there, again, a prime number or an odd number, 127. And that relates to a sidereal month. So in a sidereal month, that is where the moon comes back to its original position. So on one month, you might have new moon, but the Earth, of course, is moving. It's moving in its orbit over the course of a month, over 30 days, or 28 days in case of approximately of a lunar month. So when it comes back to the same position relative to the background stars, that's what's called a sidereal month for the moon. And that's approximately 27.32 days. And the Greeks realized that, you have over 19 months, you have 254 of these, 19 years, you have 254 of these months. It's 6,939 days. And that allowed them, this was, again, by the Greeks in about 330 BC, and it's known as the Ecliptic cycle. And you can spread that over 76 years. And it's all about breaking down the solar and lunar, basically the lunar cycle, how the moon goes around the Earth. And then there was another gear as well. It was either 222 or 223 teeth. They weren't sure how many exactly it was. And with the likes of the latest X-rays, if I play this little video here, hopefully this will play at your end. This is an X-ray that's going down through the device. And this was very interesting, actually. So Tony Freeth got in contact with a specialist X-ray company, X-Tech in the UK, and to see if they could help with looking at this object. And following a number of conversations with them, they decided at their expense to build a one-off prototype machine. This is going to be cutting edge, the most powerful version of its kind. They put a considerable expense to themselves and at the risk of the company. They developed this device. It had to be developed in a way, it took a number of years, but it had to be brought to Greece. It had to be able to fit in the doors of the museum. This was a totally one-off, more powerful X-ray and at a higher resolution than anything ever invented before. And they did this, they saw commercial benefits to this in terms of the CAT scanning and X-rays that would be needed for parts in aviation business. So this was a big gamble by them in terms of trying to make it to help with the Antikythera mechanism, but ultimately, hopefully, having benefits in the long term as well as bringing, the next innovation and technology in aviation studies. And they were eventually And they managed to do this. They managed to, and it was brought over. A forklift was just unable to bring it in the door of the museum. It was escorted from the airport off the plane directly into the museum and brought in the door. And there it had to be carefully handled by the staff as they tried to extract the device. It's at a level where it's down to sub-millimeter resolution. So you can pan your way right through to see right down into the micro detail within the text, within the engravings of the text itself. And from the studies, from this, X-ray studies, they confirmed there's 223 teeth were on that gear, and that relates to the Saros cycle, which relates to solar and lunar eclipses. So it was discovered by the Babylonians. So the Babylonians realized that 223 of these synodic months was about 18 years, 10.8 days, and they were able to use that to predict lunar and solar eclipses. So every 18 years and 10 days, an eclipse repeats itself. So if I take 2027, August the 2nd, 18 years and 10.8 days later, that will repeat itself, in this case, across the US. And again, it'll repeat itself. So you'll see it's an odd kind of number, 10.8 days. So it repeats itself on the next stage and then goes again and then comes back to the start, and it's gradually works its way up from the South Pole up towards the North Pole. And it keeps going until eventually that end of that Saros cycle, and that eclipse Saros cycle never occurs again. And then the Exeligmos cycle, 3 of these eclipses of the same number, basically it's repeating itself. So if you were to take 18 years by 3, you will see here going across North and South America, 1937, as part of the same phase, same Saros cycle, 1991 eclipse. That's the one that went across Hawaii, back in 91. That repeats itself in 2045, and it'll repeat itself, all those years again later, basically. Here's an example of March the 7th, 1970. This is the path of the solar eclipse that went across Mexico and the east coast of the US. And 54 years and 33 days later, almost an exact same pattern of an eclipse goes across Mexico and the US and up by the east coast, only a small shift, lateral shift on the physical land itself. Here's an example of a lunar eclipse that follows the same pattern. So in 1990, this was the path of the moon as it passed through the Earth's shadow, and 2044, almost exactly the same. And here you will see the part of the Earth that could see the eclipse in 1990, and almost exact same part of the Earth could see it again, March 13th, 2044. Now, what's extraordinary here is the complexity of a machine to try and simulate all of this. So the Greeks, as we'll come to, it's clear that the Greeks developed this machine very much based on information and studies of the night sky by the Babylonians. So the Babylonians would have studied the night sky. So if you think back, this is before television, the radio, the internet, the television, the sky was their medium. This is what they studied. They paid great importance on it, and they studied the heavens. So you have, for example, planets, the Greeks, it comes from the word, the wanderer. And so they were, it was extremely important to them, societies back then, to study the heavens to try and understand what was happening. And so this is a diagram of a cross-section of what this Antikythera mechanism is believed to incorporate. It has dials and wheels here which relate to the eclipse prediction, to calendars, and on the front of it, it is taught to simulate the position of the sun, the moon, and the planets. And it contains all these gear mechanisms that can simulate all these durations of the Metonic cycle over 19 years, the Calyptic cycle of 76, the Saros eclipse cycle of 18, has an option there of every 40 years as well to multiply that out, and Exeligmos cycle and the Olympic cycle as well, which is actually quite interesting that they would have the Olympics 4-year cycle on this kind of device as well. What's also interesting is that to model all of this required extraordinary ingenuity and engineering capability to make, but it also required very accurate modeling of the solar system, even though at that time they believed that the Earth was still was at the center of the solar system. And for purposes of solar and lunar eclipses, it didn't make much difference. But they knew the orbit of the moon, the movement of the moon, the pattern of its movement, to a point where they knew it wasn't circular. So in the way that we have total and annular eclipses, they knew at the time that yes, the sun and the moon's position moved in and out, and it was also elliptical. And they were actually able to make a gear mechanism to try and model that shape. It's kind of called a pin and slot mechanism, where with two gears, one on top of the other, around an off-center pin, along with a slot mechanism in here. So as one gear moved, it would bring the next one with it. And as both of them moved, it effectively formed an elliptical gear mechanism to try and simulate the elliptical shape and the movement and adjustment of the moon's orbit around the Earth. Now, this is extraordinary level of engineering to be able to develop this. These gears are about 1 millimeter in size, and all of this was made by hand. And based on technology, as we'll see in a second, from on knowledge from at a time of over 2,000 years ago, based on the knowledge from the Babylonians. One of the studies that they did on the device was called, is with a PTM dome. It was developed by Hewlett-Packard, polytexture mapping. So if any of you that observe the moon, you will know that you'll have the line of the terminator on the moon, where the light shines at a shallow angle along the horizon of the moon. And when you look along the terminator line of the moon, you'll see lots of detail. You'll see the craters, the humps, the valleys, the hills. And as you go into full moon, then the light is very flat. It's very difficult to tell detail, you know, the depth, the elevation data of the moon itself. So as the light is moving across the moon, you can see all the detail of the craters and valleys and hills. And this technology is quite similar. What it consists of is a dome with all of these little, you'll see all these circuit boards here. They each have a little flashlight on them, and it's linked to a DSLR camera. So they surrounded the device with one of these pieces of kit, and then they take, you know, maybe 30, 40 light sources on it, and they take 30 or 40 images with it of the light in every single angle at a precise point, and then combine that into software that allows them in a computer simulator to move the source of the light around to help them to read the text that's on the front of these artifacts. And that helped them significantly to try and decipher a lot of the text that was on them. So as they move the light, you can see here two examples. On the left is a brighter one, on the right is a dimmer one, but you know, more shadow perhaps, and able to read the text a bit easier. And from studying that, they could reveal letters that they were unable to read before. And again, for scale, these letters here are engraved by hand. They're about 1.6 millimeters high, to give a sense of scale. And as they're reading through these, and as they're trying to understand what is going on, they see this kind of pattern of circles, and they see all these engravings on them. And as they realize from what's happening here, it's been used to predict eclipses, but not only that, it can predict information about the eclipse. So as they decipher them, for example, on one of them, it says it'll be from the northwest, and they revolve and end towards the east, and large, and the color is red. Another one says it's from the west, and they revolve southwards and end towards the east, medium, and the color is black. Okay, so they were able to predict forward and determine to what extent what this eclipse would look like, where it would start, where it would finish, and how dark or bright it may be. And this is a diagram of what it would have looked like. This is a reconstruction of it. So on the left here, you have the front. Now, to give you a sense of scale, this is maybe slightly bigger than an iPad, okay? This, in effect, is the pre-Christian version, the Greek version of Stellarium, okay? If you were to try and simulate what the positions of the planets and the moon would be, you would turn this hand crankshaft on the right-hand side here, and that you would see all these pointers moving. The text up here was basically an instruction manual. How do you operate it? What should you see? It was very much like it thought to be like a one-off piece, maybe perhaps for a very wealthy person, a nice little toy they could have, and they could simulate what the positions of the planets would be in the night sky. On the back here, then you had these two dials or hands here, basically, and as you would adjust this over time, these hands would move. It would tell you what month it is, and if there was an eclipse or not, and a little bit of information about that eclipse. Here's more of a 3D version. You'll see the star events and descriptions and operating instructions, and some of the months' names, eclipse characteristics. And so where did this come from? Who made it? How did they invent something like this? So this is where there's still ongoing research into it. So we know it was found at Antikythera. We know when we look at a lot of the artifacts that were found there at the times, like coins, some of these vessels, for example, they can identify them to a particular region. They can see the coins date back to a particular period as well. And when they look at the inscriptions of the names of the months, they can associate them with different parts of Greece. So not entirely clear where it came from. One theory is that it was probably developed in Rhodes. When the Romans invaded Greece, they plundered, they took many of these valuables with them, and the ship got maybe caught in a storm and was wrecked off the island, off the coast of Antikythera. And it sat there basically for 2,000 years until it was recovered by these sponge divers. But it's not 100% known. And they can even use, they're down to the level now of where they have these experts in looking at the shapes of the letters. Like any language, it evolves. For example, you have American English and British English. Our language, our text, our words evolve over time. And so these experts can, when they're looking at the language, or if they're looking at English words, for example, they're able to identify them to a period of time. It's a similar study here. For example, they see the small letter of Omicron as opposed to a large letter. That helps to identify to a particular period. With the letter pi, the second leg is a bit shorter than the first leg. Again, that's from a particular period. Or the sigma symbol as well. And as they're studying these letters, it helps them to try and identify to a particular period. So it is thought that it dates back to somewhere about 200 BC. Although it may be, they have a maybe period in here of 65 BC, but they're dating, and you can see here the names of the various well-known Greek astronomers who may have been involved, who are maybe perhaps in the making of it. They're not 100% certain. Maybe it was Archimedes who developed it. It's not, we don't entirely know for sure, but it certainly is dating back to this kind of period. And to give a sense of scale, you have the death of Alexander the Great, the siege of Syracuse, the fall of the Greek Empire, Julius Caesar assassinated, and so on. But it certainly is dating back to pre-Christian, somewhere in about the 200 BC range. And then, of course, you can, if you bring this forward to the new era, people who are interested in skeletrics and models and Lego pieces, for example, decided a few years ago to try and reconstruct it. And so there's just a little video here you can watch. I'm not sure if the sound is coming through or not, is it? No? Okay. One second there. No, I'll just let it play. We'll that essentially. Basically where some engineers in Apple decided in their spare time to and I try and recreate it, basically. Which it's not simple when you suddenly start looking at the scale of this. And so finally, just to put in the words of Arthur C. Clarke, when he was commenting on this, I suppose he said that if the insight of the Greeks had matched their ingenuity, we would not merely be puttering around on the moon, we would have reached the nearby stars. So that's it. Thank you, folks. Happy to take any questions.
Absolutely wonderful.
Great.
Great overview of it, and just mind-boggling the detail that they put into that 2,000 years ago.
That's so much more information than I've ever gotten on any show about that.
Yeah.
You know, it's really astounding how complex that thing was.
And the mad thing is this is the only one of its kind we know of. There's nothing like it of any level of comparative complexity that we know of that has shown up in any records for about another 1,500 years. So suddenly clocks start reappearing in 1400, 1500 AD. Nothing like it has appeared now. A device of this kind, think of it like cars. Think of it like, you can't invent a Formula One car. That's not your first car, right? We all know the Flintstones invented the first car, obviously, right? So you start from there. You get your Model T. You work your way up, and you get the Formula One car. Okay, so how did they get to here? This is 200 BC. When they've studied it, they see very few corrections, or like this was not. It was clear it's not the first of its kind. They must have invented other more basic versions of this to eventually work their way up. But we don't know of anything about them. There's a couple of descriptions in some Greek texts of where they say that they saw this device that could predict the motions of the star or stars, or the motions of the moon or something, right? But not a huge amount of detail. It's only mentioned in a couple of places. This is the only one we have. And the only reason we have it is that it took a couple of unusual, two very rare, I suppose. First of all, it sank, right? The reckons maybe Rhodes or somewhere over there was plundered, and it was on a shipwreck and it sank. And then it took sponge divers about 2,000 years later to recover it. It is thought that perhaps in Roman times or later, that if these things were lying around, they weren't used. Perhaps they weren't fully understood, and they might have been just recycled as scrap metal, and that is why we don't have them anymore. So the only reason this exists is because it wasn't recycled. It was buried under, on the sea floor for 2,000 years, and it's taken. It just happened to be at the right place, for the right time, where another storm was to occur. Probably was a storm the first time that sunk the ship, And they've studied actually now in more recent times, they've gone back and they've been doing some more dives, and they reckon this was a very large vessel that sank. So it must have been a major storm event or the likes that sunk it. And 2,000 years later, it took another storm where by accident, sponge divers recovered it. Now there's thousands of shipwrecks all around Greece and Italy, but this is the only one item of its kind that, you know, that we know of. So what are all the things that we don't know about? You know, what are all the things that are buried under the sea, aside from the likes of this, that we just, which completely transforms our understanding of history? Really, they reckon we only have about 5% of the artifacts of any, you know, civilization, you know, from be it the Greeks or the Romans or the Romans. So it's amazing. Like, you know, it's taken one device that transformed our understanding of these kind of instruments by 1,500 years. So what else is down there? It kind of boggles the mind.
And you know, what are they going to find from us, you know, in 2,000 years?
Yeah, exactly. And especially because everything is online, we don't have letters and all this kind of thing that we used to have. So everything is digital. That'll eventually be eroded and replaced and disappear. You know, magnetic, you know, discs and tapes and that will eventually come to the point where they're not readable anymore. So
yeah,
even the actual computer itself, if you think in 2,000 years time, that just piece of plastic and metal is just going to be just dust and rotted, and they're not going to be able to use it, are they, or understand how it is?
Right. So we're erasing ourselves.
Yes.
With non-permanent media.
Like even if you look back in the space age, we're back now, even the Apollo rockets, they went to the moon. So the most complex and sophisticated piece of equipment ever invented. We don't have all the drawings and the records of that. You know, once something is accomplished, you know, they can disappear over time, they get lost, they get put in the bin. People don't realize what they have, and they get chucked out because they're superseded by the latest thing. So, and that's only 50 years or 60 years, whatever it is, you know, ago. It's not that long ago.
Gosh, I'm just flabbergasted that they were able to produce something as complex as that. It is in effect a computer.
Exactly, and there is a very interesting program that was developed for the BBC. It's called the world's oldest or the world's first computer. Now, there's an argument of, is it a computer or is it a calculator? Either way, it's an extraordinarily complex device. And it's brought up the other discussion about how did they invent this, but not really, you know, we didn't get the Industrial Revolution until, was it the late 1700s, 1800s? So did they not realize what they could create from this? If they had that level of knowledge and skill, how did they not develop the steam engine and all of this kind of thing, you know, which was so much long, you know, it took such a long time later. It's interesting.
I mean, was it just one guy in a workshop making this, or was it a mini industry somewhere? You know, was it endemic within their society that these sorts of things could be engineered? I mean,
one theory is that it came from Rhodes. It was like from a dedicated, almost like their equivalent of MIT or Caltech or something like that, where it was like this, and that they were making maybe these devices for the very rich and famous, maybe, you know, the heads of state or other very wealthy people. And of course, it came into a time then where later, as time went by, when, you know, these pieces of equipment like clocks and so on, and maybe used for controlling people, for example. And the clock, you know, when clocks came in, of course, people thought they were no longer working to the sun and the moon and the sunrise and sunset, and suddenly it was the machines that were controlling them and all of that. You know,
yeah, it's possible that they weren't. The entire society wasn't motivated to make money either. That perhaps, you know, all that was already established with royalty and family lines and bloodlines, and that there was a group of just academic, esoteric thinkers who made these devices without regard to the cost or whether they could market it to the rest of us. That would be nice, wouldn't it? If you were right
and all of that, you know.
Does anybody know whether there was an eclipse in that area around that time? Because you would have thought that if, you know, it could have been that they made this device and they wanted to see whether the prediction was correct, and were actually taking it to an area in a ship to where they thought that there would be an eclipse.
Well, it's interesting you say that there's some studies going on at the moment, and there's 2 independent studies, and they both, they're not 100% complete, but both of them are seem to indicate that it dates back to a particular, the first, because on this dial, it's across a number of months, and it indicates, you know, eclipses on certain months. So if you were to trace it back, they think that the first month on it was, I think, was it March 2005 BC. I could have that wrong. I was just only watching a new video on this in the last few nights ago. That they think is the first month. Now, whether it was for demonstration purposes for that, or maybe someone had seen an eclipse on that and they wanted to, you know, use that as their starting point to predict future ones, it's all a bit unknown. It's very much structured as if it's, here's a tool, here's the instructions, go wind it and play with it, and you'll see what happens in the future.
So, Michael, does it predicts the time and date of an eclipse, but not the location on Earth?
No, and the way I think it's been worded is that it will predict all potential eclipses. I think it's the way it's worded. So, and this is the thing that I find extraordinary, is that these are the Babylonians. They were in a certain region of Earth. You know, they weren't the Americas or Australia or Asia. It was just a particular region. So how long were they studying the heavens? And obviously an eclipse path, as you know, solar eclipse is quite narrow. To be able to decipher all of these cycles,
exactly,
must be over an extraordinarily long period of time to have that level of data to build it up, and then pass that on to the Greeks and so on to, you know, to be able to develop a device like this.
Yeah, because they wouldn't have been able to travel the Earth.
No.
And
well, there was no records of other places having eclipses that they could access.
And even back then, there wouldn't have been communication, I don't think, with Chinese astronomers or with Native Americans.
It sounds like pure mathematics at work.
Yeah.
Wow.
And did they understand the mechanism behind the eclipse, and did they use that model to predict because this was all before Copernicus and everything, right?
Correct. But
did they understand the system, or were they just using the time and the frequency? You know, it's a lot of things to think about.
Yeah, I think it was perhaps more on the, well, we've spotted this pattern and we can assess it and evolve it and make a machine to match it. But they
must have known that it was a sun-centric system in order for any of this to work.
Well, apparently not. Apparently that isn't entirely, because it is, the results are Earth-based on the pattern of the sun and the moon or lunar cycles. The moon is going around the Earth anyway, so that's the main cause of the eclipses. But it is thought that yet they were still of the view that the Earth was at the center. Now, there's a number of parts that are still missing, and a lot of the front parts are missing. And it is thought there that it showed all of the main naked eye planets. Now, at the time, and go to your point, Stephen, if you're observing the night sky and you thought the Earth was at the center, then you'd need some complex gears to get the backward and forward motion of the planets. But they reckon that they were in there at the time, these complex gear mechanisms to reflect this pattern, this wandering pattern of the planet across the sky.
Right. God's hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Reflect Jeebus or whatever, whoever was the god at the time. Yeah.
And that he would have had a little kind of almost like a model of the moon as well, and how the moon would have rotated, and you'd have seen the phases of the moon as well on it.
Wow. Holy cow. That's great. All right. Top that next month, Alexander.
Well, next month, we've got George coming to speak to us about how he built his coronagraph and how he uses his coronagraph. So that'll be exciting. So we're having a run of 2 great speakers.
Yeah, thanks to you.
So it's quite exciting. And thanks, Michael. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Hope you
enjoyed
it.
Fantastic.
It's a little different of a topic, but given, you know, I was actually on my way home. I was at the airport. In fact, that's it there. That's the Sky and Telescope magazine. I picked it up on my way back, and there was Antikythera mechanism. Couldn't believe it. And so I said, yeah, it's and one, if Pedro is up for it, it would be great if he was willing to give a talk on his little Helio, these latest is what do you call that? The
Olex.
Solex. Yes, I would love to know more about that, but let's see if we can control him into that. That would be good.
Yeah, me too.
Next one's on the chronograph. So that's a pretty amazing piece of kit, because yeah, I'd love to know more about that.
Michael, I just messaged Alexandra earlier today about, man, we really should have a presentation on the Solex and how to use it. And then she said, well, we already had one, and she sent me a video of it, and it's the only meeting I've missed so far.
Right.
And,
okay.
So I just
go back
published
and watch
that.
that. Okay.
Yeah, I just published it on the Facebook page. Doug Smith did that, and it was very, very interesting. So yeah, I'm really fascinated with that device, and I have a L Hi-Res 3 spectroheliograph already, and I'm assuming I can use it to do exactly the same thing. But I'm really interested in that, and so that's a good idea too. But
yeah,
Alexandra, she runs everything on the forum and on these meetings, and she's really the head of everything. So I just do what I'm told.
Yeah,
I just do what I'm told, and it works well that way, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because Douglas is he's sort of like reinvented the wheel in the software for that, and has really made quite a lot of headway with getting the software sorted out. And so the SHG is just incredible now, the images they're getting from that.
Well, the reason I never used the L Hi-Res for that was because there was no software that I could use, and I'm not smart enough to figure it out myself. So I needed it handed to me as a working package, and that wasn't the case.
But the aperture they're using is quite small. I mean, you use the images, the full disc images are amazing, and they just turned it. If I understand it correctly, they can just turn the dial. Oh, I'll have some calcium K, please, and they take their image and some H alpha, and they can keep adjusting along. It's amazing, really.
Yeah, that thing that Douglas Smith put up told about that, and how instead of letting the sun just pass the slit at the normal speed the sun moves, sidereal speed, that they are increasing that movement by 16x to get and using much faster cameras to make it happen a lot faster, because it would take 3 minutes for it to go past the slit.
So it's essentially, if I understand the camera, it's essentially taking a video. And because when I saw Pedro's video, I could see the image is quite narrow, and then as time went by, you could see the image getting wider, and then it got smaller again. So I presume there was some sort of, the sun was passing through the slit in some way.
Correct.
Yeah, and then the software somehow combines it all together at the end. Yeah, so that's a fascinating thing for me. Anyone else have any topics they'd like to discuss? The forum seems to be running pretty smoothly. I haven't had any problems since we went over to DreamHost. It's quite a bit more expensive, but they provide a much more stable platform than Network Solutions. My wife uses Network Solutions for her law firm, and she's got over 3 million emails separated out into over 40,000 folders, and every day there's some problem, and she's using it incorrectly. Obviously, I'd say this is not designed to catalog every correspondence you've ever had with anyone and to save all your documents, but every day that's breaking down, we got to call somebody in Pakistan or somewhere, and they do something, and they patch it up for another 4 hours. So I'm trying to get her to switch over to DreamHost. But if anybody is looking for a hosting solution, I've been through a lot of them, and this one is very good. They're excellent, and they're not very expensive compared to what they're providing. We're getting the enterprise level, our own server and everything else for relatively less money than you would pay. So
the only little thing is that with some YouTube videos, I don't understand why some of them don't actually show up in the forum embedded in the thing, even if you go through the actual the share business. And then
YouTube has 2 different types of links that they use. When you publish your video, it gives you a share link, and then that's not the same as the link in the address bar of your browser when you're watching a video.
No.
So if you click the share button on the video that you're watching, it will take you to a link that you can copy and paste, and that link always works on Solarchat. But if you copy,
it didn't work with Nix. I tried that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even Nix didn't work with it, and I didn't understand it.
Well, if you want to send that to me, I can look at it. But it takes a certain type of YouTube link to work You're talking about when you hit the YouTube button on the post on Solarchat and paste the link in between the.
Yeah, which you've been to YouTube and you click the share button,
Right.
and then you copy that string of address that's in the share thing, and then you
Mm.
put it in between the YouTube. I tried that with Nix and it still didn't work.
Well, I'll be glad to look at that for you. But I know that they have 2 different types of links on YouTube for some reason, and the one that works is U2, I think, .be something slant something, but
Okay.
I don't know. I'll be glad to look at it for you if you like. And I'm always willing to, do whatever Alexander tells me on the forum. So,
It's just a bit hit and miss with YouTube at the moment. I just never quite understand why it works. Sometimes it doesn't land.
Well, their business is to get you to watch videos and make money from advertisers, and they couldn't care less if their stuff works reliably or not.
And they've changed their ads as well. I normally use an ad blocker, but now it knows I'm using an ad blocker.
Yeah, right.
So, and it's locking in the amount to put, they're trying to get people to subscribe to the system and pay a fee, obviously trying to generate more revenue. But
well, I'll tell you what, you EU members, my wife is a healthcare privacy attorney, data privacy, and she is very deeply involved in the security of different websites and different nations around the world, and stuff you have to do in order to have a website in certain countries. And you EU people are the most protected people on earth on the internet. You should be happy about that. We
I'll just share one last thing that I'm conscious before we go, but there's an eclipse of sorts happening in December. Now it's an unusual one. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the star Betelgeuse in Orion is going to be eclipsed by an asteroid. It's an extremely rare event. The event will start off in Mexico and go across the very southern tip of Florida. It's only about 150-kilometer wide shadow, right? So it's really, so this is the path here. They reckon they have the path down to about 1 or 2 kilometer accuracy. So if there is anyone who happens to be in Miami, Homestead, down along, the Florida Keys, happy days, aim for that. December the 12th at about 1:15 UT. And then it heads across. It's quite unusual for path for, there's a lot of populated areas going through south of Portugal, south of Spain, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and towards China. So
that's a good one for Pedro then.
Exactly. And there's a number.
Is that where Lisbon is?
Yeah,
it's
right
just south of Lisbon. It's an easy drive.
Wow.
I'm hoping with a couple other people, just kind of groups who are interested. One of my areas of interest is asteroid occultations and their timing. So we have GPS equipment. We can actually measure with a number of cords the size and shape of an asteroid. And I'm hoping to go to Alicante for that with a few other people. And it'll be kind of a once in a lifetime kind of event to see. We're not entirely sure what will happen because Betelgeuse is an unusual star. It's a red giant near the latter phases of its life. And the asteroid diameter is almost exactly, apparent diameter almost exactly the same as the star. Wow. So it is thought that it may, they're not sure, will it be like a total eclipse of the star right in the center line, or how deep that eclipse will go? Will it completely disappear, or will it just drop by a magnitude or two? So it's just something very unusual. If anyone is in the area or is looking for something different to look at, that's different.
Wow.
Awesome.
I bet that used a supercomputer to predict that eclipse then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't think they had an indicator at that one. Yeah.
Yeah, not on a piece of Lego.
All right. Yeah, it's taken a number of observations of the asteroid as it has passed in front of other stars for them to know precisely how accurate, precisely determine that path. But it's interesting.
Awesome.
Well,
cool. Great. Nick, how's it going over there, man? You've been smiling the entire time.
Brilliant. It's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Glad to see you.
Michael, how did you, because I've never heard about it before it was up for discussion tonight. How did you get into it and how on earth do you know that much about it?
I've been following, I heard about it 12 or 13 years ago. I think I just saw a program or something about it. And then I actually bought a book. It's here actually, Decoding the Heavens, written by Jo Marchant. She was editor of Nature magazine. She's an entire book on it. And then I saw a BBC documentary on it called The World's First Computer. I think it was on YouTube for a while. I think it's now on Apple TV or one of these streaming systems. Anyway, you can watch it there. And I was just fascinated by it. It's something I never heard of. I've been interested in eclipses anyway, since I saw my first one back about whatever 15 years ago. And so, yeah, it was just, I was surprised that we know so few people knew about something so amazing, really. I think that's what really amazed me about it. And the complexity of this, that they could make this, you know, letters at 1.6 millimeter high, roughly, gears 1 millimeter in size. And they're able to base this off hundreds and hundreds of years of records to come up with an extraordinarily sophisticated piece of engineering 1,500 years before anything else. I was just blown away by it. I'm still amazed that it's so few people know about it. You know, it's just one of these quirks out there.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, well, that is our hour, and thank you for tuning in. We'll publish this on YouTube and try to get a working link on the forum here shortly.
Brilliant.
And I really appreciate everybody's involvement in these meetings, and I know that these are going to have some historical importance for people, even though we get the same 9 cohorts every time, and I appreciate that. But we'll see you again next month for Alexandra's arranged discussion, and that's it. All right.
Brilliant.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.